inspired, fired up and on the move. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the places and all the races, arm in arm now, upon our feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the schools and all the homes, it's time to take it. It's time to take it to the street.
Gonna get militant up in here. Hello, my friends, brothers, and sisters, and welcome once again to this week's episode of The Call, the program that calls you to action, to policy change, to advocacy, and also to education, not only in schools, but to one another. And we're so glad to have you with us because we want to equip you with the knowledge, the tools, the resources, the networking that you need to be the change in your community. And tell us about yourself. How did you come to do the work that you do? What is the work that you're involved in? And something about your background. You have an amazing background.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I'll try to make a long story short, but yeah, I started off educationally in as a special education teacher. I did my first degree, a dual degree in special education and elementary education, and went very soon after graduation from undergrad into the Peace Corps in Jamaica. And in the Peace Corps, I was a trainer for I was a special education trainer, and it was there that that I first did my work around the environment. I became a volunteer. It's my secondary project with this organization called the Center for Environmental, the Community Environmental Resource Center. And that was where I really just started to learn about environmental justice, because the Community Environmental Research Center, also known as CERC, began because the community's water supply was contaminated by Shell oil, and they fought to get a settlement, and so out of it, CERC began, which was my first, yeah. And so fast forward, after I finished Peace Corps, I went back to school and studied I studied public health and social work, with a real concentration on community organizing, because I knew, having been in Jamaica and seeing the various injustices there, and the fact that even the education system and the kids who were in the education system and who had special needs, that a lot of it was because of lack of access to public health, and just really wanted to, and just saw the power of community organizing through the experience with the Community Environmental Resource Center. And so I wanted to go back to school to learn about public health more, and to learn about community organizing and power building. So fast forward again, after I did some work internationally doing HIV and AIDS and infectious disease work, I decided the last day of my job doing that work with IMA World Health was Hurricane Katrina. And I was watching, during my going away party, I was watching the coverage of Hurricane Katrina and decided, I think in my, while I think about my next, career path, I think I'm going to go down there and volunteer. So I joined up with this group, this organization called Crisis Corps, which was a partnership between Peace Corps and FEMA, and went and spent 8 weeks down in Houston and the Gulf region doing post-Katrina work. And there I started to see all of the inequities around disaster, who was most impacted, who wasn't able to bounce back, what were the flaws in the system, and so forth. And so that added to my kind of understanding and education around environment, and then slowly around climate change, even though not particularly named at that point. And then fast forward again, after doing more work internationally and started to do more work around gender justice, at another juncture in 2009, I was ready for a new role, and saw and connected with and it put together this Movement of Color for Climate Justice road tour where I was driving around the country interviewing women who were impacted by climate change and were working either implicitly or explicitly on climate justice. And I reached out to the NAACP and asked them if there are folks that I could interview. And they said, well, as a matter of fact, we have this job. We'd love for you to consider it. I said, no, I don't want to do climate change every day, all day. But then I said, all right, I'll do it for just a year. And then but once I got there, yeah, I'm like, I'll just do it to get you guys kicked off and then I'm moving on. But it never lost its shine and it was stimulating from beginning to end. So, so 11 years and 9 months later, I was still doing it. And it had gotten to such an extent through doing that work that it was bursting at the seams at the NAACP. Just such a huge program and growing in demand, growing in resources and growing in size so that it was really so much bigger than the other programs. So it seemed time to really, move it into a larger container. And so there I decided to be the founder of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership.
Oh, okay. That's, like I said, an amazing story that has taken you all around the world and all across the country. And wow, because, I asked you earlier, I said, have you been to every state in the USA? You said not quite all of them. And I know you've been to like 40 countries or more. So that was actually the short version of your story.
Yes.
But now you have you're on a new place and a new place in your journey, in life's journey, and you talk about the Shirley Chisholm Legacy project, and I remember Sister Shirley very well. She came out of Brooklyn. I grew up in Brooklyn, and so, but a lot of people don't know her story and what she fought for and what she accomplished, and why you chose that name for your organization. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Shirley Chisholm and also about what the project is looking to do.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, the Chisholm Legacy Project, as you say, named after Shirley Chisholm. And the reason that I chose Shirley Chisholm was because I was just taken by her, by the fact that she, at a time when people were really being encouraged to just focus on racial justice, and even women who might have had a concern about gender justice were encouraged to just kind of focus on racial justice, and we'll figure out the gender justice piece later. But she stood strongly for both gender justice and racial justice. So that really struck me. And I also appreciated her sheer determination and tenacity, because whether it was, sticking to her resolve around gender and racial justice, or it was going, becoming the first African-American woman in Congress, or it was becoming the first African-American and the first woman to run for the president of the United States. And even when, she wasn't invited to debates like other people, when she came to press conferences, the reporters didn't ask her questions, but she just continued to persevere. And it just, so I appreciated that. And I also appreciated the fact that she, in her pictures, that she is smiling just as much as anything else. Like, I appreciate she was still able to find joy. She had a sense of humor that came across in her various interviews. And that's definitely something that says a lot about the strength of her core, that she was able to do that. And then bonuses, I found out later that she was of Caribbean descent, as I am, so I was excited about that. being her parents being from Guyana and Barbados. And I also found out that she was started off as a school teacher like I did. So those were kind of bonuses after I had already decided how much I admired her, but to find out that we were on a similar path was exciting.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, and like I said, I remember her, but I remember Congresswoman Chisholm also from another side because she was in the community. She was a community organizer. She
Mm.
spoke up before she went to Congress, so it wasn't like she was okay. I'm elected, but I have to keep my image up. No, she was out there. Can you speak to some of her involvement as a community organizer and activist?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you said that because that is one of the things, like, in one of the things that I was appreciating the fact that she started the Shirley Chisholm Cultural Institute and that she explicitly wanted to make sure that she had ties to the community. As even when she was in Congress, she wanted to make sure she was representing the interests of the communities and she put explicit infrastructure in place to make sure she remained tied deeply and institutionally to the communities. She didn't forget where she came from and so forth when she went into Congress, and she didn't forget who she was really representing when she went into Congress. And it wasn't this performative just so she can get votes for the next election. She really genuinely wanted to make sure that she was accountable to the communities.
Mhm. Yes,
Mhm.
and I often wonder because why has she been ignored or her story not told?
Mm.
Why has she sort of been relegated to the shadows of history? Because usually when they talk about the first woman who ran for president, you see Geraldine
Mm.
Ferraro, who you wonder, is that because she was a black woman? Um, why why do people know so much about another congressperson, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., but so little about her? And I just would like to know why do you think that?
Yeah,
Why do you think her story has not been told?
good question. I do think that she was before her time in fighting for race and gender in particular, and and I think that she was also very much questioning of the establishment, and a very, she talked about when morality and profit, I forget her exact quote, but when morality and profit kind of come in conflict, it is seldom that morality prevails or something like that, or seldom that profit fails. And
Mm-hmm.
and she really had this kind of scrapper mentality, the whole, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And so she was always scrapping for position and so forth. So I think that some folks that she was a thorn in the side of the establishment. And her whole unbought and unbossed, so many people in Congress on all sides of the political spectrum still are taking a lot of money from moneyed interests, whoever they might be. And she
Mm-hmm.
explicitly had that unbought and unbossed moniker. And so all of that, I think, resulted in her, and like I said, being a thorn in the side, so people didn't want to acknowledge that she was there, and then others not taking her seriously because she was so anti-establishment, at least the parts of the establishment that were detrimental to justice.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that is so. I mean, it's just as we're having this discussion, it's just triggering so many thoughts in my mind. Like, is it was is she has she been relegated to the shadows because she's a woman? Because I don't know of very many instances where you see her with other black male leaders. You know what I mean? So I'm
Mhm.
wondering if that might have had something to do with it also, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like you said about Geraldine Farrar, so like I think there's a like she still gets named as the first woman, and yeah, so I think that I think it's a combination of things for sure. I mean, yeah, within the Black community, yeah, I mean, I think that like I said from the very beginning, that her, that her not kind of cowing to the pressure to just focus on race and just equally focus on race and gender. I think if she had gone with fallen under the pressure and just focused on racial justice, that she would have been more lauded even within the African American community. But I think, yeah, the combination of things made her, so even within our community, she was kind of anti-establishment if the establishment called for people to just advocate for race and not gender. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I I remember her well with her black horn rim glasses
Yeah.
on. So out of that fantastic, story of black woman strong, black woman fearless, black woman fighting for justice. I can see why you're lifting her name up. And so what do you want to do? What is the project's mission? What goals? What issues do you want to take on?
Yeah. So the project has four main foci. One is community building, lifting up communities in their self-determination, ensuring the communities are equipped with the first that communities have we're facilitating communities to really have a vision around what they want, because so many of our communities are fighting against what we don't want: toxins in our communities, low health outcomes, poverty, crime. Like, we're always fighting against things, and so now part of our role is to really facilitate vision for and with communities, and so that then from that, we work with communities on developing tools for self-determination. And so that's our first focus. Secondly is the movement building. And so really helping the movement to have kind of space and focus on anti-Black racism and on racial justice in a way that they're equipped to do so, in terms of whether it's the policy analysis and the research, or it is the trainings. And we're going to be doing trainings and certification programs that really lift up the racial justice analysis, and specifically around anti-Black racism. And also we'll be organizing affinity groups, whether it's the Black Faith Leadership Initiative on Environmental Climate Justice, or the Black Culture Worker Leadership Initiative on Environmental Climate, or Black Youth Leadership, et cetera. So these different affinity groups, as well as the Global Afro-Descendant Leadership Initiative. So connecting Black folks from the US from the continent, the Caribbean, other industrialized nations that have, Black diaspora groups. And so then our third pillar is bending the arc of mainstream environmentalism towards equity and justice. So as we do these trainings and certification programs, capacity building, coaching, and so forth of people on the front lines, we want to make sure that then these mainstream folks know about the people on the front lines, so that they have folks on their advisory boards or steering committees, or at their speaking engagements, or employed, but in a way that works, because we'll also be doing JEDI work there as well, so that they can start really understanding what it looks like to center equity and justice, because we see a lot of people using those terms, but whether they're doing it meaningfully is often in question. And then the fourth pillar is supporting Black Femme leadership. And so Black women, female identified persons, making sure that they have what they need in terms of coaching, in terms of respite retreats and residencies, in terms of healing justice resources, because Black women hold so much in their families, their communities, their organizations, and the movement. They were seen as responsible for democracy itself in Alabama and Georgia and beyond, but yet they're held so little as for the treasures that they are. And often, at best, we're kind of preached at, oh, you need to engage in self-care. Meanwhile, someone's putting another brick on our backs. And so being a Black woman and seeing and experiencing and, you know, trying to hold a boundary within just such an extreme level of demand that's out there and the needs that are out there, you feel compelled, like it's in our DNA to do all that we can. And and it really is at our expense. And you see that with the poor health outcomes and all the things that happen from the lack of real ability to have that balance in one's life. And so we want to be able to provide the resources that Black women need to be able to be healthy and whole. So those are the 4 pillars of the Chisholm Legacy Project.
Wow, that is. Oh, I should have asked for them one at a time. There's a lot to unpack with that, but definitely you said one word, and that word applies for each one of the 4 pillars, and especially for the 4th pillar, and that's self-determination.
Yeah.
And part of, and that's the word that has resonated with me since the days of my youth, because our communities don't get to determine what path we take. We don't determine our future, our destiny, because there's so many levers, philanthropically, what gets funded, what doesn't get funded, what does the media lift up, what doesn't the media lift up, There's a discussion going on now with, and it's unfortunate, we feel for Gabby's family, but that same amount of attention isn't focused on a Black woman that's missing. And so many different things where our destinies, we don't have the opportunities and the tools that's another one of the pillars, and then that connection, you and I both, I tell folks, I'm a Garveyite. Africa for Africans at home and abroad, and so that connection to the motherland is very important. And in 2 ways, we have things that we can bring; they have things they can bring us, and that would strengthen both of us. In Africa, despite what the media wants to portray, the war, the poverty, those sort of things, Africa is still the richest continent on this planet. And for us not to realize our connection to it, and to connect with our brothers and sisters there, and to use each other's resources to strengthen and elevate Black people around the world, on the continent, in the diaspora, is essential. Because we are, everybody's using our backs and our resources all around the world to build empires and to enrich themselves.
Definitely.
So, and I'm a brother who says from my pulpit, or I'll say it in front of a lectern, or I'll say it sitting in the church fellowship hall, I know where my strength lies, not just spiritually, but I know that Black women carry the movement. They do all the work. They care for us. And this is what I often say, brothers need to respect the fact that even though we break women's hearts, we betray them, we abandon them, we do all of these things. If a brother has a good idea and then trying to do something, the majority of the people that you see supporting him are Black women. Black women. I don't care. NAACP, politics, no matter what it is, it's the women, and then they nurture us, they care for us, they feed us, So I know where my strength comes from, other than the Lord, and we have to help our sisters as much as we can, just like they help us. So yeah, yeah, and
Thank you.
and so
Mhm.
let's talk about Africa some,
Okay.
because you've been to 23 countries, and New Alpha, we partner with folks like both of us have a mutual friend, Winston Carew, with Agricultural Missions Incorporated, Sierra Leone, Liberia. We're doing some stuff in Tanzania
Mhm.
right now, and that we want to expand and strengthen those relationships. And so, why don't you talk about some of that? Because I'm really interested in what you've done, what you're going to do, your connection with the brothers and sisters in Kenya, because we will, we're supposed to do some things around health for women, and also some solar and renewable energy projects. So I know that was a lot, but just help a brother out.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
do Africa together.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, well, my work in sub-Saharan Africa started off with health. I was so what do you say, the assistant vice president of infectious diseases at programming at the organization called IMA World Health. And so there I I work with multiple communities on establishing, well, I was a principal for this AIDS relief project, which was under PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, in under the second Bush administration. And
Mhm.
that work it took me to 9 countries where we provided uh, assistance around training, equipment, and supplies needed to treat HIV and AIDS, as well as other infectious diseases. And so that was in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, a few other places. So
Mhm.
yeah, and so that really gave me my deep grounding in, and I said Tanzania. So Tanzania was really the kind of hub for it and for the project. And so I had to do everything from like going to those areas and starting the offices and hiring the folks to staff the offices, to setting up the programming, and working with partners, as because there are hosts in those nations. And so working with mission hospitals, working with the various governments in the different places, et cetera. And so that was deep, and it was at a time when there wasn't much in the way of Black women in leadership. So and that kind of showed up on multiple levels, from one of the times I landed at the airport in Dar es Salaam, actually in Tanzania, and you walk out and everybody's holding the signs up to say that they're, greeting people. And so I walked out and there was no sign. Like there were a lot of people who were standing there, and they would raise their signs every time, certain white people came out. And then, when other people came out, usually they would have the Black people had people that were meeting them that knew them. And so
Mhm.
there were very few people who were meeting Black people who they didn't know. So the signs were only for the white people. And so when I walked out, I had to literally walk by people and like bend my head over to look at the signs that they had, like just kind of resting at their sides, waiting for the next white person to come out. And so then I found the sign that said my name, and I'm like, excuse me, sir, that's me. And then he was shocked, um, so there was that, more kind of yeah, superficial kind of thing, to the fact that I would be in meetings and I would be the head of the delegation in the meeting, as the assistant vice president. But they would always look to, like, and so under my supervision were these white men and so forth.
Mhm.
So no matter what in the meeting, they would always look to the white man in the meeting to be the authority or the person that they were just speaking to. They wouldn't even be speaking to me, like, when they were. So even in sub-Saharan Africa, it was, our brothers and sisters were conditioned to see the white man as being in authority and being, being the person that they need to deal with. And so that was an interesting time, but on a positive note, it was beautiful.
You helped to change that perception. I know that.
I did my tiny part to do that anyway. Yeah, but otherwise, it was, to spend those years there intensely learning the culture. I went to Swahili school and learned enough Swahili to get by, and was really very gratifying, extreme learning experience. And yeah, so I was grateful for the, yeah. And so fast forward, I joined an organization called Action Aid International, where I was the senior women's rights policy analyst there. And it was working on women's rights in sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean and Asia and so forth. And so there I returned, and it was actually based in South Africa, based in Johannesburg. So I spent a lot of time in sub-Saharan Africa working with women's groups on women's self-determination and empowerment. And as it relates to HIV and AIDS, violence against women, macroeconomic policies, food security, and so forth. So that was, what I liked about that is, whereas when I was doing the IMA World Health, it was about providing medicines and medical supplies and training and less about explicitly shifting power structures. And in fact, when I would kind of delve into that realm, I got into trouble a little bit around that. So because I saw early on that, we really needed to shift power, because of even that same dynamic that I described, where the deference to white men, that it just needed to change. And so I started to do some little things, being a part of groups like Health Gap, which was out of the ACT UP tradition, which was very much challenging the systems. And so, yeah. So anyway, with Action Aid International, it was explicitly a rights-based organization that was about shifting power. Yeah.
Yeah. And the HIV/AIDS work that you did, what was that, around 2000, 2001, late 90s?
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah, I started, I interviewed for that job at IMA World Health on Inauguration Day in 2001, and I started sometime thereafter and was there for until 2005. So that's exactly when it was, 2001 to. But I had been doing HIV and AIDS work in the United States before that, but go on.
Right. Oh yeah, I just said because I know that it was really bad in Africa at that time, but also really bad in the Caribbean, and also really bad in the southeastern part of the United States, because I during the United Nations World Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia, I presented a paper there, and I called it the new World Trade Triangle, because it was like the same trade triangle that was used during slavery. And a lot of the reasons why the epidemic was so bad in those countries was because medicines weren't getting to people. Isn't that right?
Yeah, which is exactly, which is exactly why we did that program. And one of the things that I was concerned about in doing the AIDS relief program was that we were providing palliative medicines and other types of things that kind of accepted that people were going to be, be dying basically. And then we got into providing antiretroviral therapy, but the challenge that I had for the system was that we were required to only provide ARVs that were manufactured in the US.
Mhm.
And so that meant that we were providing drugs that were literally 1,000 times more expensive than
Mhm.
was available if we had just been able to buy generic drugs from India that they were producing. And
Mhm.
so we really, and so I really actually spoke at this meeting of all the kind of FDA counterparts from across the world. And I pulled together this statement based on speaking with all of these drug service organizations in the countries that we served, and put together kind of a composite statement and made it at this meeting, and really saying that like we need generics, like we can't
Mhm.
continue, like we're like the fact that it costs 1,000 times more meant that we're treating 1,000 people less because we
Mhm.
weren't able to use the money to get all the drugs that were needed to treat the millions of people. I mean, when I was in Zimbabwe, they were burying people they were burying people at 6 feet under and 12 feet under because
Mhm.
they didn't even have enough space in the cemetery for all the people that were dying. And
Mhm.
so they had to change their whole cemetery plan to accommodate stacking graves. When I was in the hospitals, it was the same thing. They had people like on mats on the floor under the beds of
Mhm.
people because there wasn't enough space in the hospitals. And meanwhile, they're literally using this money to buy drugs that were 1,000 times more expensive,
Mhm.
and it was just criminal. So I started to work with groups like I said, with Health Gap and ACT UP and others to kind of cry out for justice around this. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Mm,
think about now with the pandemic that we're currently in,
mm,
I wonder if the same sorts of things are going on in Africa and other parts of the world, because I remember in South Africa where the courts, and I think it was President Zuma, if
mm,
you remember, he refused to take medicine, and he said, "Look, for what it costs for us to bring this medicine in, it was some European pharmaceutical company. He said, "I'll build you, I'll build you a
yeah.
facility, and you can produce it right here," because they were trying to say the cost of shipping and all of that was driving up the price. And he said, "Look, I'll just build you a facility if
Mm,
that'll lower the price and we can get it to more people." And so, but let's talk about something else that you spent the 11 years and 9 months doing. And let's talk climate change and
mm,
environmental justice, and how
mm.
that impacts the world. But as always, it seems that people of color, particularly people of African descent, are impacted more.
Yes. Was there a question?
No, I would just say just start where you want. Just you've done all of this work for 11 years, 9 months as the national director for climate change and environmental justice for the NAACP. You were their national director. So tell us a little bit about that experience and what communities are facing, and what should we do to make our communities more resilient.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I first reached, let's see, I think I mentioned before that I was doing this Women of Color for Climate Justice road tour, and
Mhm.
I reached out to the NAACP to say, and that was after working, when I was working at Action Aid International, I was working, as I said before, on food security, macroeconomic policies, the intersection of violence against women, HIV and AIDS, and looking at how, and climate change and how it disproportionately impacted women. So I was working on that internationally and seeing all the impacts from like people experiencing violence against women in the post-disaster context, to women being used as weapons of resource wars, as resources like water become more contentious, and not to mention the oil trade and so forth. And so looking at all of that from that perspective, I decided, I was working with women's groups that said, hey, you're a Black American. That's really interesting to us. We would love to connect with more women of color in the United States. And so out of that, I worked with a number of different women and founded this group called Women of Color United. And it served as a vehicle to connect women of color in the United States and women of color around the world. And around common cause. And so it was through that I did this Women of Color for Climate Justice Road Tour. And so when I reached out to the NAACP to see if there were women that I could interview, that was my whole purpose. Like I said before, they said that they were interested in me taking this job. And so in doing that Women of Color for Climate Justice Road Tour and that work, I was seeing not only how women of color were disproportionately impacted throughout the world, but in the United States, whether it was because we were caretakers for children who disproportionately had asthma, or it was because we were living next to these smokestacks, some of which were emitting endocrine disruptors that were interfering with our reproductive health. Or whether it was the Hurricane Katrina or the BP oil drilling disaster, where afterwards we experienced a spike in violence against women. There were all these ways that women of color were being disproportionately impacted in the US. And so in joining the NAACP as at that time, the director of the Environmental Climate Justice Program, only ascended to the senior director role later on. I was really kind of starting where people were. I wasn't kind of like a traditional environmentalist or like this kind of zealot around environment. I was just a person who saw how it impacted women in our communities. And so therefore it made me more effective in engaging with communities because I was really starting where they were in terms of just, and so I was able to design the program around just listening to people and hearing what their experiences are, and then helping to weave a narrative that helped to understand the connection to climate change, and then weave a program that was multi-solving, that addressed the issues that they were finding on a day-to-day basis, as well as starting to address the underlying systems that were allowing climate change to proliferate. They were driving climate change into proliferation. And so that's why over the years, I would visit like a community like a community where, like Seattle, for example, where they said, yeah, we certainly care about the climate and environment. And what we're dealing with is, unemployment. We're dealing with criminal justice issues. The president of the Seattle branch at the time and was a formerly incarcerated person. And returning citizen, and so they were saying, and so then I said, well, how about if we design a program where you are working with formerly incarcerated persons, training them on weatherization, solar installation, and so forth, and that way it's a multi-solving approach that addresses the challenges around recidivism and returning citizens, that creates jobs so that people can be gainfully employed, and then also addresses the climate crisis by helping us to shift away from fossil fuel-based energy production. And they were like, yes, that's perfect. And so those are the kind of programs we design, listening to what's happening with people, meeting them where they are, and designing something that deals with what they're interested in, and then weaves in sustainability measures. So, and then that just kind of continued on. And so until the program grew to the size that it was, working in multiple places with hundreds of leaders and so forth.
and across the pond, as they would say,
Yeah.
into the international arena. Um, so you are pretty much a regular at the COP, or are pretty much a regular at the United Nations Council of Partners, which comes together to work on around the issue of climate change. Yeah.
Yes.
And so the if I'm correct, there actually was a partnership formed between the NAACP and I can never remember the name of the group in Kenya.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yes. And so the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and they're actually Pan-African. It's only the executive secretary, who I think is now an executive director. He's based in Nairobi, but the organization is Africa wide. So
Mhm.
yeah, so PACTA has a similar mission around addressing climate change and making sure, pardon? Oh,
Now go ahead.
okay, and making sure that that there is self-determination on the part of African nations, and that that they're advocating not only for resources for the nations and self-determinations for the nations, but advocating for industrialized nations to really do their part in reducing their emissions, because it's countries in the global south that are hit so hard, whether it's by disasters or drought or sea level rise, and because of the global geopolitics and economic systems, they also have the least in the way of infrastructure to be protective of those disproportionate impacts. So PACTA is really advocating for better, and so together we are for self-determination, and so together we put together an agenda for us to be so for them to understand the plight of Africans in America and other communities. And for them, during those early days when they would first come over, and we took them into some of those communities and had events together where we're showing films about what was happening in the communities, and they met some of the communities that were on the front lines of impact. Some of the people in their delegation admitted that, they really saw the US as this monolith, and they didn't know that these were the experiences of communities, and that there were some communities that earned the name that people call the global South within the North, or the South within the North, because the circumstances were so similar. And they said they didn't have any idea. They thought that it was just like a wealthy country writ large. And so that education was important in terms of finding common cause, but then recognizing that we all have our own, like they're finding self-determination for their nations. We're working on self-determination for our communities. They're pushing the US government and other industrialized nations to do better. We're pushing the US government and other kind of folks to do better as well. So we definitely have common cause, both around impacts and preparing our communities for those impacts, and around changing the system so that we do have self-determination as communities and nations.
Wow. And now we're coming to an end, and boy, I could just, we have to have you back on, because all we really did was skim the surface. Though we covered a lot of bases. And so why don't you tell our audience how they can reach you, how they can connect with the Shirley Chisholm Legacy Project?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so people can certainly visit www.thechisholmlegacyproject.org, which is our URL. And if you sign right there on the front page, it's just a landing page at this point. But if you sign up there, you can get updates when our website is up and running. And as we add content, we'll send you out no more than a monthly update as to what's going on with us. So we would definitely encourage that. And there's a place that you can write in the comments box if you have any questions or you want to work with us in any way. But we'll have lots of resources on there because as the name goes, it's a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. So we'll have lots of resources on there to be able to help with the work.
Okay, well, we want to continue to work with you. And so any way that we can help, definitely just put our name on the list. And any way we can help, we will surely do that. And so great to have you on. I hope you come back on again soon. We want
Yes.
to know how the Legacy Project grows and is established and give people more opportunities to get involved with it. And if you want to connect with us at New Alpha Community Development Corporation, you can do so by going to our website, www.newalphacdc.com, or you can find us on Facebook or email us at newalphacdc@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the call on our YouTube channel, and also to sign up to subscribe to our website so you can keep up with the things that we're doing. So thank you so much, Jackie Patterson. Stay
Thank you.
warm in
Thank you.
Anchorage, Alaska, and hope to see you soon. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. I look forward
Thank
to
you. And
it.
to all our audience, you have heard the call to direct action, to advocacy, and to changing policy so that we can have a better world. See you again next week on the next episode of The Call.
Thank you.
From